Minnesota sports fans, Jonathan Harrison here, joined by the entire Bring Me the Sports staff. Joe Nelson, Will Raggett, Tony Liebert, Nolan O'Hara. We're coming to you from a wide range of places, and I think the farthest flung is Will Raggett, who's still out in New York after a dominating win for the Vikings, 28-6. Just a wrecking crew of a performance for the Vikings. Will, let's start off the conversation here and see where it takes us. Your initial thoughts on a heck of a performance for the Vikings. I don't even know where to begin. There's so many avenues we can go, but this is just an outstanding performance in week one for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, it was really everything that you wanted to see from the Vikings, and I don't want to get carried away with this game because the Giants look like they might be one of the worst teams in the league. I don't know how much longer Daniel Jones is going to last there. Daniel Jones might get Brian Daboll fired. So we're going to see a lot more over these next few weeks when they actually play some really good opponents. But all you can do is play the teams on your schedule, and the Vikings did what they were supposed to do against the Giants. Sam Darnold, a really encouraging first performance. Aaron Jones did what he was supposed to do, and it showed why the Vikings were so excited about adding him to their offense. And then defensively, they were all over the place to start year two of the Brian Flores era. So it's hard to really criticize much from that game. But again, I think we shouldn't get carried away and just kind of focus on taking it as what it is and then seeing what the Vikings can do against the 49ers.
I feel like not getting carried away is not in Joe's game plan, so I'm going to hand it off and let him go get carried away here because he had in our weekly score predictions last week that we'll do throughout the season that the Vikings would win 27-0, and he was dang near the closest. I think I was the closest with 20-3. Every one of all you other guys had like 20-17 or some form of that. But Joe Nelson went pitching a shutout, 27-0 for the Vikings. You were the closest, Joe, so carry us away on this one. An outstanding victory for the Vikings.
I was betting on them kind of walking the talk, right? Ivan Pace Jr. kind of said it. We're gonna kick their asses, basically, is what he said a couple of days before the game, and that came true. The Daniel Jones factor was big going into that prediction as well because he's awful. Clearly one of the 3-4 worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And, yeah, I think you're right. He very well could get Brian Daboll fired, Will. But, I don't blame anybody for picking a close game because this is the same Vikings team, whether they went 13-4 2 years ago or 7-10 last year, where everything was virtually a one-score game. Everything was close. They couldn't blow out the bad teams. So if I'm going to get carried away, I'm going to do it based on the idea that Sam Darnold is exactly who he was yesterday, Sunday, in that performance, 19 of 24, 208 yards. We haven't talked much about this, but he only threw for like 55 yards in the second half. There wasn't a whole lot to do because they were dominating, but the offense wasn't nearly as good once Jordan Addison exited the game. Again, maybe the circumstances limited the amount of production that they were even trying to produce. So more about killing clock at that point. But if Sam Darnold is this type of player, if Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill are going to block against elite rushers like Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, and Darnold can still get by even though the interior line was kind of garbage with Garrett Bradbury and Ed Ingram, that's the recipe for success. And then again, year two of Brian Flores' defense with a lot more speed and a lot more depth, it looked good. The cornerbacks weren't tested much. I was a little worried about Malik Neighbors, but they did look good. We'll have to prove it against some better competition, but I think there's plenty of reason why you can get carried away with this team after one win.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's excitement about what Sam Darnold did, and I think that's the big talking point coming out of this one, guys, is 19-24, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, though. That interception was it was a tipped arm, and the ball just kind of floated around, so it's not like it was entirely Sam Darnold's fault, Nolan. But the big talking point is Sam Darnold coming out of this one. What did you think of his game and what that means for this Vikings offense going forward?
Well, I think if you would have told me that Sam Darnold's going to go out there first start and go 12 for 12 on his first 12 passes, I would have thought you were crazy. And he did that, and he played really efficient. I thought the deep ball to Jefferson was a really, really nice throw. I think he made all the plays that he needed to. I think, again, it is the Giants. I think we all can't overreact to that. They did look really bad, but like Will said, you can only play the teams that are on your schedule. And as far as Sam Darnold coming in first game as a Viking, start 12 for 12, you can't ask for anything better than that. And he looked great. And he did give some reason to believe that maybe he can kind of have that Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith type of resurgent year now that he's on a team that obviously did a good job with play calling. He's got weapons. He's got a running back who looked good too. So I think this could be maybe the start of something. It'll be a whole lot different of a defense that he'll face against San Francisco. So we'll see how that goes. But it was a very, I mean, you can't not be encouraged by this kind of performance that he had yesterday.
Joe, you mentioned that Jordan Addison went out injured. Will, I know you weren't at the press conference because you're out in New York, but you did watch Kevin O'Connell's comments. What's the latest on Addison?
Yeah, so it seems to me, just kind of reading between the lines of what O'Connell said today, that Addison probably isn't going to play in week 2 against the 49ers, which is a bummer for the Vikings because Addison had the best game of his career last year when they upset San Francisco on Monday Night Football. I imagine he'll miss Wednesday's practice, maybe Thursday. Maybe he'll return and be limited at some point and give himself a chance to play. But O'Connell seemed like he was bracing for life without Jordan Addison for at least 1 week, which would mean a bigger role for Jalen Nailor. And he even said, like, I'm going to tell Speedy this week, which is Nailor's nickname, to be ready for a lot more snaps this week, especially on early downs. He only played, I think, 26 total snaps in that first game against the Giants.
So then what's your guys' level of concern if Jordan Addison can't go? Because as Joe mentioned, the offense did kind of take a dip when he went out, and they had to rely on Jalen Nailor, Brandon Powell, Trent Sherfield a little bit more, though he didn't get on the stat sheet. What's your level of concern, starting with Tony, whether this Vikings offense can pick up in week 2 against the 49ers if they don't have Jordan Addison?
Yeah, I mean, we'll learn a little bit about the 49ers tonight when they take on the Jets on Monday Night Football. But I think the biggest thing we learned from week 1 is that this team's going to have a pretty high floor. Like if the bottom does fall out, so to speak, like it's not going to be the end of the world. Sam Darnold will be able to run this offense at a level that's going to keep them in most of these games. And without Addison, I guess you do start to get a little bit closer to the type of weapons he had earlier in his career when he struggled, but you still have the best wide receiver in the NFL. So I wouldn't have too much concern. There's been a lot to like about Jalen Nailor. And in this game, then obviously you're going to lean more on Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson, but I think they still have the personnel to be able to overcome an injury like that to Addison.
Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to play the 49ers. Whether you have Jordan Addison or not, I'm not too concerned about that. It's a big loss, obviously, but the best point here is that you're playing the 49ers in week 2 when they're probably not firing on all cylinders. They're going to be going on 6 days rest. The Vikings will have the additional day. We have no idea what their injury report is going to look like after Monday Night Football against the Jets. There's a lot of kinks that need to be worked out early in the season. And teams are going through it, and the Vikings have that extra day to prepare, which is good. And again, they're at home. It's the home opener in Minneapolis, 1-0. The doubt has kind of been – the shadowy doubt has kind of been lifted. And I think that's going to let U.S. Bank Stadium get rocking big time next Sunday. I think there's a legit shot they start 2-0, and that's what I predicted. And I firmly believe that I'll be 2-0 in my predictions when we get going here. I'm arrogant.
You did have the most optimistic predictions out of all of us. What was that? 12
well, I'm the smartest out of all of us. That's why. I'm 12-5 is more than likely going to happen.
Guys, we got to get better at our predictions so Joe can't pimp these home runs all season long, because this is going to get bad if the head's going to be outsized of that car if this continues on much longer. We won't.
It's a Hyundai Elantra. It's not too big.
Look, I'm never going to root against the Vikings. I try to be somewhat objective as a reporter on the beat, but I think Joe looks good here with his optimism for the Vikings to start. I would just say let's see if they can do it in this kind of gauntlet of tough teams that they got coming up starting next week.
Well, the good news
I do feel better about that gauntlet now than I did about 2 days ago before the Giants game. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting what you learn after week one, and it is overreaction week in the NFL for sure. But the Rams almost beat the Lions in Detroit last night, and the Lions didn't look that good. Obviously, they're tough as nails and still very good, but they didn't look that sharp. I think Jared Goff had like a 47 passing grade. It wasn't his best work. The Bears, Caleb Williams looks like a bust. We're 1 week into it, 4 quarters, but he threw for 94 yards, and Bill Belichick looks like a genius for saying that he did not look good or accurate to him in preseason. And the Packers lost Jordan Love, and I know that we're seeing Schefter say now there's a logical point where he could return in week 4 against the Vikings, but throw logic out the window and believe that it's a knee injury that we all still don't know a whole lot about, and that might just be optimism speaking at this point. And there's a really good chance that he doesn't play in that game. So the Vikings might be gifted an opportunity to go to Lambeau Field against Malik Willis or Sean Clifford. That's almost a guaranteed victory if that's the scenario that sets up in week number 4, depending on Minnesota's health. So, yeah, I mean, there's again, I'm very excited about the possibilities that lie ahead of this team, and the rest of the league might help them out along the way.
Well, jumping off of that talking point there, I want you guys, we'll go around the horn here. We'll start with Will, go to Nolan, go to Tony, then Joe. Let's get your thoughts on how week 1 changed your perspective of what the Vikings can do going forward based off of everything we saw in the NFC North this last weekend with, as Joe mentioned, Jordan Love's injury, the Lions squeaking one out against the Rams, and the Bears somehow finding a way to beat the Tennessee Titans with the rookie quarterback, which I believe is the first time a first overall pick has won their debut game in I think something like 15 years. It's been a very long time.
It's like 2002 or 3, I think it was. Yeah.
It's a ridiculously long stretch, and somehow the Bears squeaked it out, probably because Will Levis is not that great of a quarterback
100%
in Tennessee.
why. Yep.
So let's go around the horn here. How week 1 changed your thoughts on what the Vikings can do in the NFC North, starting with Will?
Yeah, it changed it a bit. I don't think it changed it super drastically. I think the Lions still are probably in a class of their own in the NFC North, and the Packers aren't far away from that, depending on how long Jordan Love is out. I think the Vikings, there were a lot of encouraging signs in this performance. Like I said, the defense was really good. I think that's legitimately going to be a top 10 unit in the NFL this year, because I think Brian Flores is one of the best defensive coaches in the league. I just think there's talent and depth up and down the roster on that side of the ball. I feel definitely encouraged by Darnold's first performance. I just want to see it more and more and more against some defenses with a little more talent on the back end than the Giants had. So I would say it has changed a bit, and everything else that's happened in the NFC North, the Vikings have to feel a little bit better about that as well, even though they're just going to be focusing on themselves for now. But again, I'm trying not to get carried away. If they go beat the 49ers next Sunday, then maybe the conversation will be a little bit different.
Then will bounce or jump on the bandwagon here for sure. Nolan, Tony, then Joe.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Will. I don't know if it drastically changes anything, because at the end of the day, they were playing the Giants, and I think we might have a battle of who is going to take longer to win a game. Will it be the Giants or the Carolina Panthers? Because those two teams look to be pretty awful. But I will say, like I said with Darnold, he goes 12 for 12 to start, no matter what NFL team it is, even if it is against the Carolina Panthers or the New York Giants. That's an impressive start. I think he looked a lot sharper than I really expected him to. I think the defense looked fantastic. And I think there's definitely a little more optimism as far as what their ceiling could be. Maybe have a little more belief level. They might be able to sneak into a wild card spot than I did before. I think Darnold is probably a little bit better than I maybe thought he was to start the season. But at the end of the day, they played the Giants. We'll really see how good they are this next week against the 49ers. We'll see again when they play the Texans. Packers, if Jordan Love is healthy, we'll get a good taste there too. So I think can't overreact to anything yet, but it's just all you could ask for is they went in and they got the job done, and they looked pretty much flawless doing it yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of bounce off that similar way of thinking, but I would kind of say that my outlook on the Vikings themselves is kind of the same. But when you look at the injury to Jordan Love, that changes the outlook in the NFC North. And I think with this Vikings team, the biggest thing is how much room do they have to improve? Because a lot of their top contributors, we know what Justin Jefferson is, we know what Aaron Jones is, and we might know what Sam Darnold is at this point. Like, he's a guy who can play at a level to be a game manager, but is he going to go out and win you a game? When you look at teams like the Bears, they're going to have the optimism that thinks Caleb Williams is going to continue to improve, and they're going to keep improving throughout the year. I just don't know if the Vikings can necessarily be on that same track offensively. Defensively is a different story. I think they can kind of peak at the end of the year, which could help their ceiling. But I kind of have a similar outlook on this team. I think they're going to be in most games, but it's just going to come down to tight games. Is Darnold going to be the type of guy that can put together a game-winning drive in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, my outlook hasn't really changed much. I'll say this. I had a positive outlook as we've been talking about, but it'll get really positive if they actually do show up and beat the 49ers and the Texans. If you split with them and it's competitive in the loss, I still think the ceiling's extremely high, but thin. They're very thin. They're skating on thin ice at a bunch of positions outside of safety. If Christian Darrisaw or Brian O'Neill gets hurt, I think they're up Bleep Creek at that point, because I don't know who's going to protect Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold, as the numbers, the data, 6 years of history reveals, he is good when he's protected. And we saw that in New York at MetLife Stadium. He looked very good when he was protected. Put pressure on him, problems come to arise. So if you lose one of your tackles, I think you're in big-time trouble. Now, the next couple of weeks are the ultimate test, because I think the pass rushes get better. As good as Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence are, now against the 49ers, you've got Leonard Floyd and Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave, who came over from Philadelphia, one of the best interior defensive pass rushers in the game. I think PFF had him ranked 4th last year. That's going to be a big-time challenge. If he can perform well against that front, that's a good sign. And then 2 weeks from now, you get the return of Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson in his second year. That's going to be nasty against the Texans. So if you can show up against that kind of front, and you all know the pass rush, the front, the pressure teams put on quarterbacks in the playoffs, that's what it's all about. If Darnold can perform and the Vikings offense can find their rhythm like they did against the Giants, against those kinds of teams, then look out, because I think Will's right. It's a top 10 defense. They have depth all over the field on that side of the ball right now. A little thin on the defensive line, but like the edge rushers, they brought in all these new cornerbacks. The safeties are deep. Little thin at linebacker too, but yeah, I think they have all the pieces to really, really gear up for a strong run if they stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that will certainly help their passing game is having what looks like a legitimate running game for the first time in the Kevin O'Connell era. 14 carries, 94 yards for Aaron Jones, a rushing touchdown. Will, is it just one game against a poor Giants team, or do the Vikings actually have a running game now with Aaron Jones at the helm?
I think it's pretty clear that their running game is going to be better than it has been the last 2 years, which is a very low bar to clear, because they've had one of the least efficient, least explosive, least utilized overall running games so far under the Kevin O'Connell regime. But with Aaron Jones, they have the best running back O'Connell's ever had, and I don't think it's particularly close. He's really efficient. He's explosive. He's got great vision. He's got the burst to be able to make guys miss in the open field, and we saw that on that touchdown that the Vikings had yesterday, which, by the way, they didn't have a rushing touchdown until week 8 last year when Cam Akers scored against the Packers. So they got that out of the way in the first quarter of this game. I think it all comes down to Aaron Jones staying healthy, and they're going to continue to mix Ty Chandler in to try to achieve that. But I was really high on Aaron Jones coming into this season, just watching him in training camp and hearing what the coaching staff had to say about him. And I think you saw why in week 1, and he'll look to keep that up moving forward.
You guys, Ty Chandler looked really great receiving out of the backfield too, didn't he? I mean, I thought he looked really good. And then one other quick note. I think we all kind of commented on this in our little chat during the game, whoever was on there. is 4th and 1. Vikings are in their own territory, and they go for it early in the game. And Aaron Jones gets met in the backfield, but he had that second surge to get over the line for a first down. Last year with Alexander Madison, Ty Chandler, or whoever it was, that was an absolute disaster and a turnover on downs, right? You're not getting that second effort and that moxie, that football smarts, just that ability to recognize the situation and keep fighting. I'm not saying guys didn't have fight, but they just couldn't get the job done. And Jones did that. And then on that touchdown run, that was a loss or a fumble, right? That was nobody was getting in to the end zone on that Aaron Jones touchdown run a year ago. So right off the bat, things are 100 times better on the ground for the Vikings.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved seeing the run game come to fruition. Guys, before we close out the Vikings and the NFL segment here of the show, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the former quarterback for the Vikings and his no good, very bad day, and more or less the reaction that has gone across the national pundits, across the NFL, to that game. Kirk Cousins, 16 of 26, 155 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, sacked a number of times by the Steelers, twice for 18 yards in a 18-10 loss to the Steelers, and Justin Fields at quarterback. Will, it wasn't a great day, but I think for me, the thing that stood out is the reaction from those NFL pundits where they've commented about the lack of movement and mobility from Kirk Cousins, saying it was down to the injury. But for those of us that have watched Vikings football for the last 6 years and watched Kirk Cousins, that seemed like more of what we've seen from him for the past 6 years, more than anything that has to do with the injury. I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I think the reaction nationally has been a little bit off for me anyways.
Yeah, it's been interesting. The statistics are the thing that is concerning. And I don't know exactly how much of this had to do with Kirk's Achilles or not, but the Falcons didn't have him under center at all. It was all pistol and all shotgun. They didn't use any play action, which is something he's thrived in over his whole career and really his time with the Vikings. And then, just not a lot of movement, and that's never been a huge part of Kirk's game, but he wasn't throwing deep at all. There were some times where it looked like he was maybe struggling to kind of drive off that back foot, and it's the right leg where he had the torn Achilles last year. So it's concerning immediately if you're the Falcons with that performance where he threw a back-breaking interception late. He had a couple strip sacks by T.J. Watt that were called back due to defensive penalties on the Steelers, so it could have been an even worse day. There was a fumble on a botched exchange with his center. It was really ugly, and you start to wonder, like, did the Falcons know something, or were they bracing for this possibility when they drafted Michael Penix? And then I guess the counter to that would be if they suspected this, they probably shouldn't have signed him to a $180 million contract. But if you're a Falcons fan, you are kind of in full panic mode today. And Kirk could come out next week and look a lot better and shut that down. But that's on Monday night against the Eagles in a place where he has historically struggled. So,
hey, it's not Kirktober yet. We still got to hit Kirktober.
Yeah, he could turn this around. He's not as bad, if healthy. He's not as bad as he looked in that first game. But if he's not healthy and suddenly there's an issue there for an aging quarterback, that is going to get really rough in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear, guys, that you take away a man's legs, you take away the man's power, and the zip on the fastball just isn't there anymore. And it's a lot different throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and T.J. Hawkinson than it is Drake London, Ray McLeod, and Kyle Pitts, who still hasn't done anything despite his lofty expectations when he was drafted a few years ago. So, yeah, I mean, on paper, the Falcons looked really good. They really did. But they're screaming down an 0-3 start because the Chiefs are waiting in week number 3. It might be over fast for the 2024 Atlanta Falcons, and I wouldn't be shocked if Kirk gets benched if he's unable to move and really show that he's got the physical ability to still play.
Yeah, that is overreaction.
I was going to say, are we even going to see Kirk Cousins play?
It's overreaction.
It is overreaction
here. Big time.
Yeah. But they
lost by there's a one score game to a really good defense, and first game back from an Achilles with the new offense, super rusty.
Well, I mean,
they'll be fine.
They had 50 yards in the second half. 50. I mean, this isn't the Gophers.
Justin
We're
Fields
talking
at
about
quarterback.
the Atlanta
Let's
Falcons.
be honest here.
Yeah, but Pittsburgh won like 10 games last year with Kenny Pickett. Like, that team just wins with doesn't matter who's playing. They could throw me out there and win 10 games. So apparently their defense is great.
What are you going to do when you put Kirk Cousins on some icy turf like in Brazil, like in Chicago or Green Bay or somewhere else like that? He's got no chance. No chance. He's on turf. He's on the perfect manicured field in that multi-billion-dollar palace down there in Atlanta.
I think he'll be fine. I think it's an overreaction to a one-score loss to a really good defense.
I don't know, it's Justin Fields for me. That's what does it for me. That's what kind of sets it over the top for me, is that it was Justin Fields at quarterback. And
as things stand right now, the Bears maybe should have kept him.
Hey,
we're overreacting.
Bill Belichick would agree. No, Bill Belichick would have agreed.
There's no overreacting involved with what the Twins did this last weekend. 0 for 3 against the Royals. Nolan, what the heck happened? How are they now 5 games behind the Guardians in the AL Central? They're now behind the Royals as well. What happened this weekend, Nolan?
Well, they didn't have any offense. That's first and foremost. And then the one opportunity they did have to win a game Saturday night, they blew it. They blew it big time. I mean, Bailey Ober was fantastic. Allowed 1 hit through 7 innings, was just 83 pitches, and then Baldelli wanted to turn to the high leverage relievers in Duran and Jax, which I understand, and he flipped it. A lot of times he'll have Jax come in for the 8th and Duran for the 9th. On Saturday, it was Duran in the 8th, probably because Jax has been more consistent, wanted to have him close it out, but Duran's inconsistency showed, and couple balls got hit and play, and all of a sudden the Royals score 4 runs and they lose, and they get shut out again on Sunday, and it's just it's as bad of a weekend as they've really had this year. Besides the beginning of the year when they lost how many was there, like 4-12 to start.
Yeah, they started 7-13, yeah. But they've lost 14 of their last 20. So this is actually a worse 20-game stretch than the one they started with. So talk about a collapse at just the wrong time.
They've now lost.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Rick.
I think 2 things can be true with that game on Saturday. That was quite frustrating. Like, when you go to Joan Duran and Griffin Jax with a 2-run lead, those guys should be able to get it done, and you have to be able to trust them in those spots. And the players on the field, there were errors, and just they need to execute. But at the same time, it was just baffling and indefensible to me that Rocco took out Bailey Ober after 83 pitches, having just set down 15 in a row. He was absolutely cruising, and we know that Bailey Ober this year, sometimes he gets into trouble in the first inning, but then once he gets into a rhythm, he can really go and really lock in and get a lot of weak contact. And he had just gotten through the good part of the Royals lineup for a 3rd time, and was going into the bottom half of the lineup. To not let him at least start that 8th and maybe have Jackson Duran getting loose out there was just kind of baffling to me. And I think the Twins got what they deserved in that game to some degree. And then also they scored 2 runs in the whole series. And Royce Lewis looks like he's just completely run out of gas here recently. So it's concerning in a lot of ways. I think the offense is still a bigger concern than the pitching, unless they can get Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton.
Well, in some ways, too, that loss, I mean, that is big on the offense, too, because if they did have any more than a 2-run lead there, Rocco would have kept Bailey pitching. But with the tight game 2-run lead, he's going to try to go to the high leverage guys.
It's still a stupid decision. I mean, it just is. It's over-managing. It's overthinking. And like Will said, when you put in Duran in the 8th inning and you mix it up when Jax is used to that role, that makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. You've got 83 pitches. If you're a Twins fan, that's the maddest you should have been after a starting pitcher who's dominating got pulled since Ron Gardenhire took out Kevin Slowey after 7 no-hit innings back in August 2010. I'll never forget that. I'm like, this guy's throwing a no-hitter. He's got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to complete it, and because he's thrown 105 pitches, you're going to yank him? And it's a guy who doesn't throw 99. It's not like he's at risk for Tommy John surgery because he throws so damn hard. But you take him out, and you ruin the no-hitter. And you know what? They won that game, I believe, but it wasn't a shutout by any means, and the bullpen made it dicey. This is like a systemic chronic issue here in Minnesota where our management can't stand seeing starting pitchers finish the job. And it made no sense. Ober's mowed down 15 guys in a row, and Rocco's like, hey, let me put on my baseball brain. And let's put in the reliever. Rocco's got a winning record, but he makes a lot of bad decisions. And yeah, I get it. It's 162 games. You're not going to get them all right, but those are just so obvious where a team is not touching this starting pitcher who's been one of the best in baseball since mid-June, and you're in the middle of a freaking race trying to salvage your season without it crapping down the drain and missing the playoffs because the Mariners or Tigers are going to hunt you down. That's embarrassing. It's a terrible move.
I mean, that is one of those things too, though. But you're also kind of saying it, right? Like at this point, they needed a win bad, right? So if you need a win bad, who are you going to put in there? You're going to put in your top 2 high leverage relievers, and they didn't get it done too. So there's
You know what?
there's blame all around there. I would, again, I'd like to see them leave pitchers in more. But at that point, if you think you really need a win, if it's the playoffs, that's how you're going to manage in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, John Duran has been a good reliever, but it's not like he's 2006 Francisco Liriano, right? Like he's been touchable. He's lost a little bit of zip on his fastball. He's been touchable. He's gotten roughed up a few times. And then to take him out of his comfort zone from the 9th inning and go in the 8th inning, it makes no sense.
I would say I don't know. The 8th to 9th inning thing doesn't bother me, and I generally I think the criticism of Rocco for not leaving pitchers in can be overblown because a lot of times the numbers tell you that starting pitchers just don't have great numbers a third time through the order.
Well, but Will, he had just mowed down the 2, 3, and 4 hitters.
I'm talking generally. In this specific instance, with the way Bailey Ober was pitching, I absolutely disagree with the move. I just think more broadly, if that's anybody else, and they hadn't been as sharp as Bailey Ober had just been for the last 5 innings, I think it makes sense in that spot. It's just, to me, you have to trust Bailey Ober there to get 3 more outs, maybe 6 more outs with the way that he had been pitching. And that allows you to save the Duran or Jax or both for the next night. So I also understand what Nolan's saying, where, yes, those guys have to be able to get it done. Those are your 2 dudes in your bullpen, and a lot of blame has to go on them and Duran specifically. But in that specific instance, I really think that should have been Bailey coming out with the ball again for at least the 8th inning.
Let's play a quick hypothetical, right? Rocco Baldelli's the manager. Jose Miranda has 12 consecutive hits and 12 consecutive at-bats. And there's his next at-bat. The game's on the line. And he's going up against a right-hander who just dominates right-handed batters. What are you going to do? You're going to take out the guy who has 12 straight hits, or are you going to go to the lefty off the bench who's cold because he might have a better advantage against a right-hander who's good? You all know you're sticking with the hot bat. Why the hell would you do anything different with a starting pitcher? It makes no sense.
I think that's the frustrating thing, is it just kind of seems like it's been the same story with Baldelli, that he just makes the similar analytical decisions when it comes to pulling starting pitchers like that. And while the numbers might back that up, it just seems like it always comes back to bite them, and it just seems like it's the same issue every year.
We write
so 3 or 4 stories
every year about this.
I just think it's the one thing I would say is it's an easy way to analyze it at times when it doesn't go well and you're like, oh, you should have left the guy in. And it just leaves out the countless examples of a starter staying in too long and giving up some runs in the 3rd time through the order. And then you're like, oh, you should have taken him out earlier. And that won't get nearly the buzz because those things happen. But yeah, I in this specific instance, I really think it should have been over, but I tend to push back a little against the general criticism of Rocco as analytics and whatnot, and because I think more often than not, it is the right call to go to the bullpen in the spots where you need to.
So where do we stand on his comments last night after the 5-0 loss 5-0 loss to the Royals? Said that was an unprofessional series of baseball that was just played, and that's all I'm going to say about it. He didn't answer any questions. That's all he said to the press. Where do we stand on his comments, Nolan?
Well, obviously, a pretty frustrating series. I think, I mean, sometimes that is all that needs to be instead, really. I guess, last night wasn't the Ober game, so he had to field questions about that the night before. I think sometimes it's just that was terrible, and that's all there is to it. So they got to try and turn things around here back at home tonight. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have too much about it. It was bad series. Probably their worst weekend of the year. And that's pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to hear what Rocco says, ahead of the Angels opener on Monday. And then even after the game, after they perform, depending on how it goes, we'll get a good taste of that. But I got a feeling Rocco probably laid into those guys a bit. I get the impression that doesn't happen very often because he seems very calm and in check and kind of like Will, where he's measured. He's not like me, where he's going to overreact to everything, right? And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for sure. But I bet he lost his cool a little bit on those guys because he's got to be feeling the heat. I mean, you're seriously in danger of, sending this thing right down the toilet drain. There's teams that are getting pretty hot and they're coming up behind you with some good starting pitching and offense. And if you can't hit, whether you have your AAA guys in or your studs, Correa or Buxton and Kepler, if you're scoring 68 runs over the course of a 20-game span like they have, you got to start laying into the guys and expecting more. They just have to produce.
Yeah, before we send you off, Will, I got
agree.
a question for you. Because
Okay.
I know you got to get out here in a little bit to catch your flight back to Minnesota. Twins now losing 14 of the last 20, only 3.5 games up over the Tigers and Mariners in that last wild card spot. They have the Angels, Reds, Guardians, Red Sox, Miami, and Baltimore coming up left on their schedule. Are they in danger of dropping out of the playoffs and missing the playoffs this season, Will?
Yeah, they are in danger of it. I don't think it's particularly likely, just because 3.5 games, 19 left is still a pretty solid chunk for a team like Seattle or Detroit or Boston, whoever, to make up. And all those teams have just really been 500 teams all year. But the Twins have been a sub 500 team for the last 20 games, and I have less confidence that they're going to snap out of it than I would if they were healthy. And I agree. Like, I think it was really time for Rocco to start laying into his team, because they have to go out and they have to hit and they have to perform. And it's not his fault that Byron Buxton can't get back in the lineup and Carlos Correa can't get back in the lineup and Royce Lewis is worn down because he's played 60 games in a season for the first time in a really long time. And it's got to be frustrating for Baldelli to kind of be going through this right now and see the danger of this thing possibly slipping away from the Twins. So it's time, starting right now, starting tonight on Monday night against the Angels, for the Twins to kind of take care of some winnable series at home, and just, if they can go like 500-ish over these last 19 games, I don't see Detroit or Seattle ripping off like 14 wins in that span to get past them. But if they continue to play at this really rough sub 500 pace, then they're going to be catchable, and it would be a real disaster in a lot of ways, just kind of the way that things will have shaken out in the second half if that does happen.
Yeah, for sure. Will, I know you got to get going, so we'll let you head out and catch your flight back so you can get back to the better state that is Minnesota.
See you, Will.
All right. So now let's move on to our next discussion, our last topic of discussion. Tony, this is where you'll come in handy for us. Give us a recap of what happened Saturday at Huntington Bank Stadium. The Gophers hung 48 on the very good Rhode Island Rams squad. What happened? What did we see? And what are the big talking points coming out of this one?
Yeah, I think it's much like the Vikings went over the Giants. I think it's important to not overreact to this game because Rhode Island's not a good team. They're not going to be playing in the FCS playoffs. They're probably in the middle of their conference in the FCS. So the Gophers did what they needed to do. You're supposed to have blowout wins in these games. But with that being said, there was still a lot to like. Max Brosmer played much better, but he was supposed to play much better because it's against a much worse team. And I think the biggest thing is the Gophers' offense is going to look a lot different when Darius Taylor plays. I think my takeaway from this game is if Darius Taylor played in week one, I think the Gophers probably would have won that game. They're just a much more dynamic offense when he's on the field, and I think they just open things up more. He had a career high 4 catches for a little under 50 yards. I think it was 46 or 48 yards, and that's an aspect that I think hasn't been in a PJ Fleck offense since he's arrived in Minnesota, and I think that really adds a dynamic to things going forward. But other than that, on the pessimistic side, I think there's still a lot of issues on the offensive line. 8 different linemen played for the Gophers in this game. And at the safety position, they had 5 different players play before garbage time. So there's still a few position groups that they need to figure out before Big Ten play, but they did what they needed to do this week.
Are we concerned about the struggles with the run game earlier on? I believe over the first 2 games, they're averaging 2.7 yards a carry on 35 attempts so far this season. Is that a concerning aspect to this team? Because we know that they rely on the run game heavily. Is that concerning for Gophers fans going forward, Nolan?
I don't think it necessarily is, mainly because, you look at the averages over 2 games. One of those games, Darius Taylor didn't play. Another game, they're throwing the ball a lot more because they're playing an FCS team. So I don't think you really have a good picture of what the run game can be like yet. And also, too, North Carolina has a really good defense. So you're playing without your starting running back against a good defense, and then you kind of playing an FCS team. So there's only so much that you can really take away from that. So I don't know if it's like a real cause for panic or anything. I think we'll see, their first Big Ten game is going to be against Iowa. Well, that's a great defense year after year after year. We'll really see what the run game can do then. I think now anything takeaways from just these 2 games, looking at those numbers when one of the games your star running back doesn't play, I think it's kind of hard to tell what it's going to look like.
Yeah,
Joe,
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd agree with that. Sorry, Jonathan. I was actually pretty shocked with the way the Gophers came out and played that game against Rhode Island, because I figured it would be the same old year number 8 under PJ Fleck. We're a superior team. We're more physical. We're going to run it down your throats, and we're not even going to risk throwing the football. But instead, they took the opportunity to develop some sort of passing identity. I guess it's not fair to call it an identity until they do it over and over again, but some sort of passing rhythm against an inferior opponent. And Max Brosmer ended up with the highest grade for passing among all Division I FBS quarterbacks who had at least 31 dropbacks in week number 2. You know who was number 2? Future first-round pick, Cam Ward of the Miami Hurricanes. So that's the kind of game that Brosmer had against, again, inferior competition, but he was getting everybody involved. Running backs, like Tony mentioned, tight ends, Jamison Gears looks really good. Lameek Brockington had a couple of nice catches. Christian Driver flashed a little bit. Daniel Jackson looks great. It was a good all-around performance, and I'm very surprised and actually quite excited that they decided to air it out a little bit, because that's the kind of football they're going to have to play to beat Iowa, to win at Michigan, to go head-to-head against Miller Moss and USC, and those are the next 3 opponents after Nevada this coming Saturday. So that was a taste of their potential. Again, not going to overreact. I wouldn't say doing to Rhode Island is what the Vikings did to the New York Giants. I think the Giants are, decent defense, so the Vikings doing that was pretty impressive. But the Gophers certainly did what they needed to do to instill at least a little bit of faith in me and probably a large portion of their fan base.
That was going to be my question, is how you reacted to this one, because I know you were heavily critical of what we saw week 1 against North Carolina.
10-2 college football
Nevada,
playoff still in play.
It is.
It's still alive. You just had to replace one of the other losses that Joe had predicted with the North Carolina one, because I believe you had a win for that one, Joe. So
Michigan looked horrible. The Gophers can beat them.
Michigan did look terrible, and they got absolutely smoked at home. So Texas is legit, though. Oh my God!
It's also a little bit, guys. It's also a little bit tougher when you don't know what the offense is running or the defense is running.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Michigan's in rebuild mode for sure. That now actually does look like a winnable game, when I would have said early on with the preseason ranking that the Wolverines had, not so much. But again, I think Texas is probably a Final Four contender this year. So Quinn Ewers, Archie Manning as the backup, Matthew McConaughey as the offensive coordinator. I mean, they've got it all going for them down there.
Tony, what should we expect from this Nevada game?
Yeah, Nevada's an interesting team. They were voted last in the Mountain West preseason. And
so another very good team that the Gophers are playing.
Yeah, I'm curious how PJ Fleck will swing this into saying that they got the prime Miami Hurricanes coming to town. But yeah, but Nevada's a lot better than they're not the worst team in the Mountain West. They're a solid team that honestly might be able to sneak into bowl contention. They're a lot better than their preseason projections said. It's actually a quarterback the Gophers have faced before. Brendan Lewis was the quarterback at Colorado when they destroyed them like 41-0 a couple years ago.
No worries.
And now he's the quarterback at Nevada, and he's kind of had a good start to the year. So they're a solid team. The Gophers are favored by 2 touchdowns for a reason, and they shouldn't have trouble in this game. But with Iowa next week and with all those big games coming up, like Joe mentioned, it's important to not look ahead in this game and kind of still treat it as they did the Rhode Island game, I guess.
Yeah, you don't want to get Northern Illinois at home to Nevada. That would be absolutely horrible. I'll say that Northern Illinois quarterback looked really good. Hampton. I think his last name was Hampton.
Saying you don't want your team to pay $1.5 million to lose to another team?
How many times have the Gophers done that, actually? I bet they've done that a handful of times.
Bowling Green.
Bowling Green for sure, yes.
Bowling Green almost did it to Penn State just this week, too, here.
Yeah.
You know what? You make a good point. Again, we talk about, like, these winnable games, and the Gophers are a Power 4 team. They are supposed to be better on both sides of the ball this season than they were last year. You know, Penn State, that's a winnable game. You know, it just is. As long as Drew Allar isn't Jesus Christ in that game, you got a shot. And that's what happened on Saturday against Bowling Green. Penn State was not that good. They had to come from behind.
At home, rivalry game, rivalry trophy on the line.
Yeah. I mean, anything's possible.
So now with the Michigan game and apparently the Penn State game as toss-ups now for you guys, are the Gophers going to go 4-0 in trophy games this year? Going to sweep them all and take them all home?
I still think that they're going to miss out on a bowl game. I'm not buying into the hype from this game. I think they'll be in the mix in a lot of these games, and I wouldn't be shocked if I get proven wrong. But as we mentioned how bad Penn State and Michigan might be compared to what we thought, Illinois beat Kansas this week.
Yeah.
And Rutgers continues to look like a team that'll be solid. So it's just there's not – and Maryland will be a solid team again. There's not many, like, guaranteed wins on the schedule. So, they still got a lot of room to grow.
There's an insta-firing that's going to happen if Ethan Kaliakmanis and Rutgers beats Minnesota. It's
on the road, too.
Yeah, Fleck's done. If that happens, I guarantee Fleck gets fired. That'd be the most embarrassing outcome you could possibly imagine.
I will guarantee that he wouldn't.
Yeah, I would guarantee that too.
Nah, I'm going to go the opposite way. If they're not a bowl team and you lose late in the season at Rutgers to Ethan Kaliakmanis, and Ethan Kaliakmanis is, let's say at that point he's got like 21 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, it makes you look like a fool. It does.
The expectations are just not that high here.
Look like a fool a lot.
The expectation, well, I would think internally the expectations are fairly high for Mark Coyle. I mean, I know it's a transfer portal era and all this jazz, but you went out and you got a quarterback. You promised everybody you'd throw the football. You promised everybody you'd have an aerial attack to complement your elite rushing game led by your, future NFLer, your running back. Got all your linemen back, right? Like, this is safety U. We put all these safeties in the NFL. You got a 4-star recruit in Coy Parrish. I mean, who's stopping these guys?
Who already has an interception.
Yeah, who's stopping these guys? So if Ethan Kaliakmanis stops these guys, whoo, it's going to get hot.
Joe's going to heat up that seat by himself.
Guaranteed.
gonna take a while to dust off the ice from that thing or heat off the ice from that thing, but Joe will heat it up.
No.
Are you going to be paying the buyout, Joe?
No.
It's a big buyout.
No, but
7 extensions later, that's kind of a big
he's
buyout.
had his buyout reduced like every single year because who was it that this offseason called him a job hunter? Oh, man, who was that? That was one of our top click stories over the summer. It was,
I think it was an anonymous coach, if I remember.
Yeah, I think it was an anonymous coach. It was like, yeah, PJ Fleck's a job hunter. And, you know, if things are looking a little rocky here, and let's say Drake Lindsay, the future quarterback's like, you know, I might reopen my recruitment here. Who's got the NIL money? You lose him, and PJ is going to be like, see ya. But he might not have to say see ya if you lose to Ethan Kaliakmanis.
Realistically, like whenever that comes up, though, it's like there's no who are you bringing in? Who's taking over as coach?
Thomas
Deion
Hammock,
Sanders,
Northern Illinois coach. Thomas Hammock.
They had like 4 wins last year.
I don't know. He just went to Notre Dame and beat the Irish. I don't know if you saw it.
They're ranked now. They're number 25 in the country now.
Yeah, well, Rudy, I don't know if you guys saw this on Twitter, but Rudy entered the transfer portal after that embarrassment. You guys know
getting
who
Rudy
Rudy
too,
is.
the comeback.
Do you guys know who
No, they're
Rudy
too young, Joe.
Yeah.
They're way too young to know who Rudy
I
is.
definitely know Rudy.
All right.
I have
Well,
seen
he's in the
that
transfer
movie
portal.
before. Yeah.
They saw it in history class. That's how young they are.
yeah, that's probably true, Jonathan.
All right, boys. It's been fun. Been 50 minutes of good Minnesota sports chat after a busy weekend across Minnesota sports. Come back tomorrow. Also, before you go, remember to click subscribe. It does help us out. And you will get notifications every day of when a new video comes from the Bringing the Sports channel. So we'll talk to you again tomorrow with another topic across Minnesota sports.